Welcome to Histology Hub. In the heart of the Cold War, two superpowers battled beyond Earth itself. This is the epic space race, USA versus USSR, a showdown that changed history forever. Imagine a time not so long ago. The world was divided. Two great superpowers stood on opposite sides of the globe. On one side you had the United States of America. It championed freedom and democracy. On the other side was the Soviet Union, or the USSR. It stood for communism and a different way of life. These two nations were locked in a tense standoff. They called it the Cold War. It was a war fought not with armies clashing on a battlefield but with ideas, with spies, and with a constant race for power and influence. They competed for everything, from allies to Olympic medals. This rivalry was intense. It was a global chess match where every move was watched. Each side wanted to prove that its system was superior. They wanted to show the world that their way of life was the best. This competition spread into science and technology. Whoever had the most advanced technology would have the advantage. They could build better weapons. They could have stronger economies. They could inspire more nations to join their side. So, the best minds in both countries worked tirelessly, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, always trying to get one step ahead of the other. Then, a new arena opened up. It was a place no human had ever conquered before. It was vast, mysterious, and full of wonder. This new frontier was space. The endless blackness above our heads became the ultimate stage for this grand competition. Reaching for the stars was no longer just a dream for poets and astronomers, it became a national goal. Conquering space would be the ultimate demonstration of power. It would show the entire world which nation was truly the most advanced, the most capable, and the most visionary. The race to the heavens was about to begin. Why space, you might ask? Because it was there. It was the highest ground. In military terms, controlling the high ground gives you a strategic advantage. Both the USA and the USSR understood this. If you could put satellites in orbit, you could spy on your enemy from above. You could relay communications across the globe in an instant. You could even, in theory, place weapons in space. So, the desire to explore the cosmos was mixed with a deep sense of fear and military strategy. It was a race for glory, yes, but it was also a race for survival in a very tense and dangerous world. The date was October 4th, 1957. On that day, the Soviet Union did something incredible. They launched a small metal sphere into the sky. It was only about the size of a beach ball. It had 4 long antennas sticking out from its body. This little ball was named Sputnik 1. It was the world's first artificial satellite. It was shot into orbit around the Earth, traveling at incredible speeds. As it circled our planet, it sent out a simple, repeating radio signal, a faint electronic beep that could be heard by anyone with the right radio equipment. That little beep was a shockwave. It traveled across the oceans and continents, and it struck fear into the hearts of many Americans. People would gather in their backyards at twilight. They would look up trying to catch a glimpse of this new, man-made star moving across the night sky. The beep was a constant reminder. It was a message from the Soviet Union. The message was clear. We are here. We are ahead of you. For the first time, Americans felt vulnerable. A Soviet satellite was flying over their homes, their cities, their military bases. The sky was no longer a safe and distant ceiling. The American public was stunned. How could this have happened? The United States saw itself as the world's technological leader. It had the best scientists, the best engineers, the best everything, or so they thought. Suddenly it seemed the Soviets had leaped far ahead. Newspapers ran panicked headlines, politicians demanded answers. The Sputnik crisis, as it came to be known, was a moment of national soul-searching. It was a wake-up call. The comfortable belief in American superiority was shattered by a simple, beeping ball orbiting the Earth. This event officially kicked off the space race. It was no longer a theoretical competition. It was real. The starting gun had been fired, and the United States was already behind. The beeping from Sputnik was more than just a radio signal. It was a challenge. It was a gauntlet thrown down from the heavens. The Soviet Union had claimed the first victory in this new cosmic contest. The question on everyone's mind in America was simple but urgent. What were they going to do about it? The nation's pride and its security were on the line. The launch of Sputnik sent a jolt of energy through the United States. The government knew it had to act, and it had to act fast. In 1958, just months after Sputnik's flight, a new government agency was created. It was called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. Its mission was simple and direct: to lead America's civilian space program. The goal was to catch up to the Soviets and eventually, to surpass them. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about national security and proving the strength of the American system of innovation. NASA gathered the brightest minds in the country. Engineers, scientists, and test pilots were brought together for this monumental task. The early days were filled with a sense of urgency. The pressure was immense. The first attempts to launch an American satellite were difficult. Rockets exploded on the launch pad in front of the whole world. The newspapers called them flopniks and kaputniks. It was an embarrassing and frustrating time. But failure is often a part of science. Each explosion taught the engineers something new. They learned, they adapted, and they kept trying. Finally, on January 31, 1958, success. A satellite named Explorer 1 was successfully launched into orbit. America was officially in space. It was a much smaller satellite than the Soviets' later Sputniks, but it was a huge victory. More importantly, Explorer 1 was not just a beeping ball. It carried scientific instruments. It actually made the first major discovery of the space race. It detected vast radiation belts trapped by Earth's magnetic field. These were later named the Van Allen belts, after the scientist who designed the experiment. This showed that America was not just trying to get into space, but to understand it. The Soviets, however, were not standing still. They continued to achieve incredible firsts. They sent the first living creature into orbit, a dog named Laika. While Laika's mission ended tragically, it proved that a living being could survive the harsh conditions of spaceflight. Then, the Soviets sent probes that flew past the moon and even crash-landed on its surface. They even took the first pictures of the far side of the moon, the side we can never see from Earth. For every American success, it seemed the Soviets had two more of their own. The race was on, and the pace was frantic. The next great leap in the space race was not about machines, it was about people. Who would be the first nation to send a human being into the vast emptiness of space? Who would be the first person to see our planet from orbit? This was the next grand prize. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to achieve this milestone. They selected elite groups of pilots. In the US, they were called the Mercury 7. In the USSR, they were a group of brave cosmonauts. These men were pushed to the limits of human endurance, training for a mission that no one had ever attempted before. On April 12, 1961, the world got its answer. The Soviet Union did it again. A 27-year-old cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin climbed into his Vostok 1 capsule. With a shout of "Poyakali," which means "let's go," he was blasted into orbit. For 108 minutes, Gagarin circled the Earth. He became the first human to journey into space. He was the first to see the world as a beautiful blue marble suspended in the blackness. He saw the curve of the Earth. He saw the continents and oceans pass below him. He was a Columbus for a new age, exploring a new and uncharted sea. Gagarin's flight was a stunning achievement. When he landed safely back on Earth, he was an instant global hero. He was a symbol of Soviet power and ingenuity. For the Soviet Union, this was their greatest triumph yet. It proved, in their eyes, that their system was capable of achieving the impossible. They had not only put the first satellite in orbit, but now, the first man. The world watched in awe. Gagarin's journey was a powerful piece of propaganda, but it was also a profoundly human moment. A single person had dared to leave our world, and he had returned to tell the tale. In America, the news was another blow. They were close, so close. Just a few weeks later, on May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. But his flight was different. He flew a suborbital mission, which means he went up and came straight back down. He did not complete a full orbit of the Earth like Gagarin did. While Shepard was celebrated as a hero in the United States, the world knew that the Soviets had won this crucial leg of the race. The United States was still in second place. And for a nation that prided itself on being number one, second place was not good enough. The United States was falling behind. The Soviets had the first satellite, the first animal in space, and now, the first human. The American public and its leaders were growing desperate. How could they leapfrog the Soviets? How could they win the space race once and for all? The new president, John F. Kennedy, understood the power of this cosmic competition. He knew that America needed a goal. It needed a challenge so bold, so difficult, that it would galvanize the entire nation and prove American greatness to the world. He needed a finish line that he could declare first. So, on May 25, 1961, just a few weeks after Alan Shepard's short flight, President Kennedy stood before the U.S. Congress. He gave one of the most famous speeches of the 20th century. He did not propose a small step, he proposed a giant leap. He declared that the United States should commit itself to achieving a monumental goal. He said, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." It was an astonishingly bold promise. At the time Kennedy made this speech, it seemed almost impossible. The United States had only managed to send one man into space for 15 minutes. The moon was 250,000 miles away. No one knew how to get there. No one had built a rocket powerful enough. No one had designed a spacecraft that could land on another world. The technology simply did not exist. It was like a group of people who had just learned to build a canoe, declaring that they would cross the Atlantic Ocean in a week. But the goal was set. Kennedy's speech was a rallying cry. He said America would do it not because they are easy, but because they are hard. This challenge ignited the nation's spirit. It focused the efforts of NASA. It poured billions of dollars into research and development. It created a new generation of scientists and engineers. The mission was called the Apollo program. Its single purpose was to fulfill Kennedy's promise. The race was no longer just about getting into orbit. The finish line had been moved. It was now located on the dusty, silent surface of the moon. The years that followed Kennedy's speech were a whirlwind of activity. NASA worked with a focus and determination never seen before. The Apollo program was the largest technological mobilization in history during peacetime. Hundreds of thousands of people across the country worked on the project. They designed and built the mighty Saturn V rocket, the most powerful machine ever created by humans. They developed new computers, new materials, and new ways of navigating through space. They launched a series of test missions, Gemini and then Apollo, practicing every step of the long journey to the moon. There were triumphs and tragedies along the way. In 1967, a fire during a ground test killed the 3 astronauts of Apollo 1. The nation mourned, but the program did not stop. The astronauts and engineers knew the risks. They pushed forward, learning from the disaster to make the spacecraft safer. Then, in 1968, the Apollo 8 mission did something incredible. 3 astronauts flew all the way to the moon and became the first humans to orbit it. On Christmas Eve, they read from the book of Genesis and showed the world a stunning picture of the Earth rising over the moon's horizon. A photo we now call Earthrise. Finally, the moment came. On July 16, 1969, the giant Saturn V rocket stood on the launch pad. Inside the Apollo 11 capsule at the very top were 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. The world held its breath as the rocket roared to life, shaking the ground for miles around. It climbed into the sky, a brilliant pillar of fire, carrying its human cargo on the most daring voyage in history. For 4 days they traveled through the blackness of space. Collins stayed in orbit around the moon, while Armstrong and Aldrin climbed into the lunar module, a small craft named the Eagle. On July 20, 1969, the Eagle began its nail-biting descent. Alarms blared in the cockpit as the landing computer became overloaded. With fuel running dangerously low, Neil Armstrong took manual control. He calmly steered the craft past a field of boulders and found a safe place to land. He sent a message back to Earth Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. A few hours later, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch, climbed down the ladder, and placed the first human foot on another world. As he did, he spoke the immortal words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The United States had won the race to the moon. While the world celebrated the triumph of Apollo 11, a secret drama was unfolding within the Soviet Union. The Soviets were not just watching the American moonshot, they were in a frantic race of their own. They had every intention of beating the Americans to the moon. Their program was shrouded in secrecy. Unlike NASA, which conducted its missions in the full glare of public view, the Soviet space program was a state secret. Their successes were broadcast to the world, but their failures were hidden away, denied, and erased from history for decades. The Soviets had their own brilliant chief designer, a man named Sergei Korolev. He was the genius behind Sputnik and Gagarin's flight. He had grand plans for a Soviet lunar landing. His vision involved a massive rocket called the N-1. This rocket was even bigger than the American Saturn V in some ways. It was a hugely complex and ambitious machine. But Korolev faced many challenges. He did not have the same level of funding as NASA. He also had to deal with intense political rivalries within the Soviet system, which slowed down his progress. Tragically, Korolev died unexpectedly in 1966, leaving the lunar program without its visionary leader. After Korolev's death, the N-1 rocket program continued, but it was plagued with problems. The rocket's first stage used a staggering 30 engines. Getting them all to work together perfectly was an immense engineering challenge. The Soviets rushed their development, trying to catch up to the Americans. They launched the N-1 rocket 4 times between 1969 and 1972. Each time, the result was a catastrophic failure. The rockets exploded shortly after liftoff, with one explosion being one of the largest non-nuclear blasts in history. It completely destroyed the launch pad. Because of the secrecy, the world knew nothing of these spectacular failures. The Soviet government never admitted they were even trying to go to the moon. When Apollo 11 landed, they simply congratulated the Americans on their achievement and pretended that they were focused on other things, like building space stations. It was only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s that the full story of their secret moon race came out. We learned that they were much closer than anyone knew. If a few things had gone differently, the first footprints on the moon might have been left by a Soviet cosmonaut. Landing on the moon was the peak of the space race, but it was not the end. The competition between the United States and the Soviet Union simply shifted its focus. Having lost the race to the moon, the Soviets concentrated on a different goal: long-duration spaceflight. They wanted to learn how to live and work in space for extended periods. This led them to develop the world's first space stations. In 1971, they launched Salyut 1, a small orbital outpost. Cosmonauts could now stay in orbit for weeks at a time, conducting experiments and studying the effects of space on the human body. The United States also launched its own space station, Skylab, in 1973. It was much larger and more advanced than the early Salyut stations. It was made from a converted upper stage of a Saturn V rocket. Crews of astronauts lived and worked aboard Skylab, making important discoveries in astronomy and Earth science. However, after the Apollo program, public interest and political will for expensive space missions began to fade in the US. The focus shifted to creating a reusable spacecraft, a space truck that could travel to and from orbit cheaply and regularly. This led to the development of the space shuttle. Even as the rivalry continued, the first seeds of cooperation were being planted. In 1975, in a remarkable moment of detente, an American Apollo capsule docked with a Soviet Soyuz capsule in orbit. This was the Apollo-Soyuz test project. American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts floated into each other's spacecraft, shook hands and shared meals. It was a powerful symbol. The two bitter rivals who had competed so fiercely to conquer space were now working together above the Earth. It showed that space could be a bridge, not just a battlefield. It was a glimpse of a different future. Space exploration also expanded beyond human missions. Both superpowers sent robotic probes to explore our solar system. These silent robotic explorers became our eyes and ears in the cosmos. American probes flew by Jupiter and Saturn, sending back the first close-up pictures of these giant worlds and their moons. Soviet probes successfully landed on the hostile surface of Venus, transmitting the first images from another planet. This robotic exploration was less glamorous than sending humans, but it greatly expanded our knowledge of the universe. The race for prestige continued, one planet at a time. The space race officially ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But its legacy is all around us. It fundamentally changed our world in ways we often take for granted. Think about the technology in your pocket. The drive for smaller, more powerful computers for the Apollo missions helped kickstart the microchip revolution. This led directly to the personal computers and smartphones we use every day. The race to the stars spurred innovations in material science, communications, and medicine. Things like GPS, memory foam, and even freeze-dried food have their roots in the technology developed for space. The race also changed how we see our planet. For the first time in history, we saw pictures of our world from the outside. We saw Earth not as a collection of countries on a map, but as a single, beautiful and fragile sphere floating in the vastness of space. This perspective, known as the overview effect, had a profound impact on human consciousness. It helped inspire the environmental movement, It reminded us that we all share one home, and we need to take care of it. The Earthrise photo from Apollo 8 became an icon for a whole generation. The competition also fueled a massive investment in science and education. In response to Sputnik, the United States poured money into its schools and universities. A whole generation was inspired to study science, technology, engineering, and math. The heroes of the day were not just movie stars or athletes, they were astronauts and engineers. This educational push created a skilled workforce that drove American technological and economic growth for decades to come. The race to the moon was also a race to create smarter, more capable citizens. Finally, the end of the race ushered in a new era of international cooperation. The International Space Station, or ISS, is a perfect example. It was built and is operated by many nations, including the United States and Russia, the two former rivals. Astronauts and cosmonauts now live and work together peacefully, conducting science for the benefit of all humanity. The fierce competition of the Cold War has been replaced by global collaboration. The space race began as a battle for supremacy, but it ended up giving us a new perspective on our world, incredible technologies, and a shared dream for exploring the final frontier together.